everybody. How's everybody doing right now? Doing all good? Okay. So my name is Juan. I started off as a graphic designer and an art director, and then now I moved into the whole design research space now that I'm a master's student at Carleton University in the School of Industrial Design. And so my title is called Design Activism and Exploring the Aesthetics of Collaboration and Inclusion in the context of LGBT people, and people are like, what does that even mean? So prior to entering grad school, I did a lot of like queer-related projects, primarily within sexual health and HIV education and awareness. And I found it incredibly difficult sometimes, and sometimes I always felt like people were just telling me, well, it's you, you're the problem, and I'm like, thank you, that's really nice to be informed. And to sum up my experiences working within LGBT spaces, but not to say all LGBT spaces, I like to use The Simpsons, and this is exactly how I like to describe what is happening in many LGBT communities, specifically in Toronto or where I've worked in the past, and is that a lot of people will want to make these projects, and it's great that they have aspirations, but when it comes down to it, a lot of people have just tried nothing and they have no ideas, and that's no fault of their own, but at the same time, how can you use design to really integrate into these spaces is kind of what I'm really curious about and what I've always been curious about. So grad school, when people I tell people like I'm in grad school, everyone's like, wow, you must have like gave up on life or something, like you really had to go to grad school, and I'm like, yes and no, but it's more of like the one thing I found frustrating with work was that I didn't actually have these research skills or what like research capacity was, and I apparently didn't know what research was, but like apparently I was doing research and I wasn't doing research. But I guess this is where you get to go to grad school, and that's the reason why people go to grad school. I'm not going to recommend it for everybody unless you really want to like lose your mental health and like your sanity. But anyway, I went to grad school and I kind of went into this question about learning about entrepreneurship and how does entrepreneurship operate as an intervention for LGBT people, especially those who are living with episodic conditions. And the issue with that is how do you actually reintegrate them back into the labor market. And I think a problem with this was that realizing that like work in itself attributes to like your self-worth, or how we assume your capacity to work is also your value and your capacity to contribute to society. I'm not sure what that is. And like part of this question, I kind of realized like, why didn't I just like ask like gay DJs about how do they make their dance parties inclusive, because that's essentially what that question is. But I realized I'm like, wow, why did I do this? But at the same time, I'm really curious about it. But where am I going with this? So trying to address this question, it's about like what challenges I'm having, and I'm having one right now. Is not working. So yeah, and I think one of the things is like, well, that sounds like a social problem, and why are you in the School of Industrial Design? And the thing is that even a design issue. And when really kind of asking that question, like, and even within my own practice, how I've learned to address this, I'm like, yes, if we choose it to be, and I think this is what the issue with design and how it should work is that if we choose it to be, and it's more of that issue around capacity and how do we instill capacity. Because when I started with that question, the thing I was really interested about was that I'm not interested if LGBT people with episodic conditions can start a business. It's more, can we translate the skill set of entrepreneurship, such as decision making, back into a population who have had their absolute dignity and agency removed from them. And yeah, and to an extent, I'm like, I feel like I already have the answer for this, and it's like, yes, this actually does work. However, the issue is that we don't really have enough evidence around it. And one of the greatest challenges about like working this is this concept of disclosure and how you actually interpret disclosure. Is that in order to actually get help specifically for this population, is that you actually have to disclose that you are of this population, and then also within the context of disability and accessing support programs, you actually have to tell people you are disabled. And within that, it's always been around the issues, are you disabled because you have the disability, or is it because people have conceived ideas of what this disability means? And this is where I'm really researching, and it's very difficult because of like the protectionist mentality for this population. It's just like, you're marginalized, we have to be very careful with who you work with, and it's more of that language of marginalization that really creeps me out, but at the same time, how do you disclose that, A, am I part of this population, and A, why does that even matter whether it's going to influence my work? But in the end, it kind of does and it kind of doesn't, and that kind of what makes it really, really tough. The next issue is that around this issue of what you're perceiving as perceived discrimination and factual discrimination within the space, I find this is the one thing that I get told a lot when working with this population or working with these people and working, even within my own experiences, is that what you're not being discriminated, you're just perceiving it as discrimination and it's not factual. And in trying to move forward with it, like, yeah, there are all these weird starting points and there's all these influences, but it comes down to the issues when coming to do research on this population group is that it's always told from the context of service providers, so those who actually have the capacity to do the research, and then also the fact that there's not enough evidence around this, and that's kind of what motivates me, and it kind of tells me to keep going at it because it's deeply unexplored. At the same time, it's always pulled from this narrative of service providers. The next thing, what I find really challenging about this is that I am really scared to ask certain questions, but also I've never felt socially isolated. I think it was interesting that someone brought up the issue around loneliness, and I think to expand on that issue on loneliness is that you can be alone and not feel lonely, but you can be surrounded with so many people and you can actually feel socially isolated. And more importantly, the issue with working on the subject matter is that people don't actually have the same language to talk about it, and it's more of how do you actually give the words to that population to actually articulate the concerns. And that's kind of where the direction of my work has always been, and also where my direction of my work continues to go. And how does that relate to design activism? And it's more of, as designers, do we actually care about these issues, but also how do we use our skills to actually address these issues? Because I'm still kind of debating what my thesis question is again at this point. So it's like, what am I doing? Design activism, but like that's like the fun and easy thing, because people get like very scared when you introduce disability and entrepreneurship, and they're like, oh, those are related. Anyway, how I responded to this prior to doing it is that me and my friend Jay, who's up in the back, say hi. We introduced this collective called Softball Collective, and the issue is that we're designers with hard technical skills, but the main interest is that how do we develop our soft skills? How do we talk about disclosure? How do we give ourselves the other skills that we didn't get in school? And one of our projects was called Surveillance of the Body, and essentially, me and my friend were hanging out one day, and we're like, you know, it'd be really funny if we were in a drawing class, and we were all naked, not just the model. And it kind of like, a lot of this came around the issue around HIV and sexual health, and how do we negotiate our bodies, because for some people, saying no, it's very hard, and the assumption with saying no is that everyone can equally do it. And how do you actually deal with rejection? How do you talk about your body? And how do you deal with body issues? And it was kind of funny because we met up for like half an hour, wrote a grant, and we got approved within 2 weeks. And essentially, we always thought it was funny that someone trusted us to take a bunch of homeless to Hamlin's Point and just draw. And yeah, someone trusted us, and at the same time, it was kind of fun to collect data on it, but also realizing this is a form of participatory-based research. And how we facilitate is that we put our drawing materials in the bag, and then we'd ask questions at the bottom. It's like, what is your body's foreign policy? Or like, what product parts do you find weird? But it's more of how do you facilitate discussion in spaces where you feel uncomfortable, but also how do you actually ensure that people feel comfortable in spaces where they've never been before. And also, yeah, just where have you ever felt excluded, and how do you actually do it in a very respectful manner, I guess. The other project was called Turnip Time Machine. And Turnip Time Machine was essentially our response to HIV in the 80s and 90s. And the thing is about being young today is that I feel like I get antagonized by a lot of older queer men about like, oh, you don't understand us, you would never live through the crisis. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. I fully admit that. I will never fully understand who you are, but we're going to try something, and we call this thing called Turnip Time Machine, and where we used a pickling turnip workshop as a metaphorical vehicle to address HIV, and everyone's like, what does HIV and pickled turnips have to do together? And I was like, well, this is where we get to make new meaning and make those connections. And what we did was that for pickled turnips, the idea is that there's turnips, and then there's a beet, and there's all this liquid that you put in together, and that in the end, there's this minority element that comes in, which is essentially also a metaphor for HIV introduced to the body, and that it eventually will take over the entire jar and convert what those pickled turnips, so they become one thing to another, but also We thought of this about having a different attitude towards stigma and trying to fight against the masses when people are constantly being negative, but like what happens to having that alternative opinion. We also see it as like a side of being a metaphor for it, and you have to constantly go into spaces where you're the minority, but also being the minority also means you have the opportunity to create change within the space. So yeah, these were the final product, and these are our participants. And the idea is like, I think one of the great lessons is that we collaborated with the Shrewsbury Health Center and Planned Parenthood Toronto. But like, what have I really learned within this whole like disability and LGBT collaboration space and activism, all that? And to sum it up, I really want to show you my laptop. And the issue with this is that it's not a matter of whether it's a PC or it's a Mac, but one of the key features of it is that I have a really cracked screen, and everyone's like, why do you work with that thing? It's broken. And to sum that up, the lesson is that you might be broken, but you are not useless. And when it comes to disability, sometimes people may be ready to tell you that they have an issue, but you have to be prepared to tell them, or prepared to listen, whether you have the skills or not. So thank you.